The first thing Evelyn noticed about the village was the silence. Not the kind of quiet that comes naturally in the countryside, softened by wind and the distant trill of crickets, but an oppressive, unnatural stillness that seemed to press down on the skin. No dogs barked. No voices carried across the cobbled square. Even the church bell, frozen high in its tower, looked as though it hadn't been touched in years. Her boots struck the uneven stones as she crossed into the village center, the sound echoing far louder than it should. She tightened her scarf around her neck and glanced over her shoulder. Daniel followed a few paces behind, carrying the camera rig slung over his shoulder like a soldier's weapon. His breath clouded in the damp air, though Evelyn swore the fog itself had weight, the way it pressed in around the edges of her vision. "This place is a ghost town," Daniel muttered, his voice half swallowed by the mist. "You sure about this?" Evelyn adjusted the strap of her satchel, willing her heart to slow. She was sure. She had to be. 4 months she dug through archives, followed breadcrumbs across brittle newspaper clippings and microfiche reels, until every lead had pointed to this place, Hollowhurst. A name whispered in old police reports, murmured in forums filled with half-believers, a cursed word in village folklore. At the center of it all stood the house. The Hollow House. A decaying structure crouched at the edge of the woods, its shutters closed like blind eyelids, its windows black as sockets. A house where families had gone in and never come out. Where villagers crossed themselves at its mention but refused to say why. If Evelyn could capture its truth, if she could prove what had happened here, it would be more than just another documentary. It would be the thing that set her career alight, the film that audiences couldn't look away from. She wasn't chasing just horror, she was chasing recognition, purpose, a chance to claw herself out of obscurity. Daniel, though, wasn't so convinced. "You're staring at the fog like it's going to answer you," he said, trying to keep his tone light. "Let's get this over with before I freeze." A figure stirred from the shadows near the tavern, startling them both. Evelyn stopped short. An old man emerged from beneath the low eaves, his spine crooked like the beams above him. His coat hung too large on his thin frame, and his cap was pulled down nearly to his eyes. He leaned on a stick worn smooth at the handle. "You don't belong here." His voice rasped like a match struck too many times. Evelyn steadied herself and managed a polite smile. "We're just visiting. I'm a filmmaker. We're doing a documentary." The old man's expression didn't soften. His gaze slid past her to Daniel, then back again, landing finally on the satchel at her side. "You came for it." The house. The air between them seemed to contract, thickening until Evelyn's pulse thundered in her ears. She swallowed hard, but her voice didn't waver. "Yes." The man shook his head slowly, like he'd expected as much. "The Hollow House doesn't welcome guests. It never has. You should leave before dark." Evelyn opened her mouth, but the man raised his stick sharply, silencing her. "You think it's empty. But it isn't." His eyes were pale and rimmed red, the look of someone who hadn't slept in decades. "The house breathes, remembers, and it feeds." Daniel muttered, "Jesus," under his breath, shifting uncomfortably. The old man leaned closer, and Evelyn caught the smell of tobacco clinging to his coat, undercut by something sour, mildew perhaps, or rot. "If you go in," he whispered, "you won't come back out. The house doesn't let go of what it takes." Then he shuffled past them, stick tapping against the cobbles, and vanished into the fog. For a moment, neither Evelyn nor Daniel spoke. Evelyn felt her chest constrict, her ambition warring with something much more primal. Fear. Daniel broke the silence first. "Well, that was welcoming." Evelyn forced a laugh she didn't feel. "Every legend needs a village prophet, right? He probably tells that story to spook tourists. Do you see any tourists?" She ignored him, already striding toward the lane that led to the woods. The house waited, and nothing, not even whispered warnings, would stop her now. The Hollow House stood at the tree line like a carcass too stubborn to decay. Its roof sagged in the middle, tiles missing like broken teeth. Shutters hung askew, nailed shut in places, fluttering loose in others. The front door loomed, weathered gray and scarred with deep gouges as though clawed at by animals, or hands. Evelyn lifted the camera from Daniel's shoulder and clicked it on. The mechanical whir filled the silence as the lens adjusted, drinking in the house's grim facade. "It's perfect," she breathed half to herself. "It looks exactly like the stories." Daniel muttered something about poor lighting and bad angles, but he followed her up the path anyway. The air grew colder the closer they drew. Evelyn felt it prickle along her skin, tightening every muscle in her body. The porch creaked beneath their weight. Evelyn reached for the doorknob, but it gave before she even touched it. The door groaned inward as though it had been waiting. The stench hit her first, stale damp, mold and something faintly metallic like rusted iron or old blood. Dust swirled in the weak shaft of light spilling through the threshold. Daniel gagged. "Christ. This place is a biohazard." Evelyn stepped inside. The air seemed thicker here, every breath weighted. The floorboards complained beneath her boots, the sound echoing through hollow chambers. Wallpaper peeled in curling sheets, revealing layers of faded patterns beneath. A banister leaned against the staircase like a weary old spine. But it wasn't just abandonment she felt. It was presence. A slow exhalation, as if the house itself had just noticed her. Her breath came shorter. "You feel that?" Daniel shifted uneasily, adjusting the camera strap. "I feel like I'm going to catch tetanus if we stay." "Not that." Evelyn lowered her voice. "The air feels heavier, like it's pressing in." Daniel didn't answer. His silence was answer enough. They moved room by room, Evelyn filming everything: water-stained ceilings, furniture draped in moth-eaten sheets, windows clouded with grime. In the dining room, the table still held plates, though the food had long since rotted to indistinct stains. A child's high chair leaned crooked against the wall. "People lived here," Evelyn whispered, the thought almost reverent. "They ate here. They laughed here. And then they vanished," Daniel finished. He turned the camera to her face, catching the flicker of unease she couldn't quite hide. "Evelyn, how long are we planning on staying? This place doesn't exactly scream, 'Spend the night.'" "As long as it takes." She said it firmly, though her voice carried a tremor she hoped the mic wouldn't pick up. The deeper they explored, the stronger the feeling became. Drafts brushed their skin though the air was still. Shadows stretched longer than they should, curling at the edges of their vision. Somewhere, faintly, Evelyn thought she heard a whisper, too low to make out words, but enough to prickle the hairs on her arms. At last they reached the staircase. The steps rose steeply, shrouded in gloom. Evelyn hesitated, then mounted the first. The wood groaned. By the fifth, the whispering grew louder, or closer. Daniel's hand brushed her arm. "Do you hear that?" "Yes." Neither of them dared say more. At the top, the hallway yawned before them, doors lining either side like gaping mouths. Evelyn's flashlight beams swept across faded wallpaper scrawled with faint marks, as though children had once drawn there. A crooked picture frame dangled by a nail, its image lost to mildew. They tried the first door. It opened to a bedroom stripped bare, only the iron bed frame remaining rusted and skeletal. The second door stuck but gave way, revealing a nursery with a cracked crib and a mobile that spun slowly though the air was still. It was the third door that stopped them. Scratches scored its surface, deep and desperate, gouged in every direction. Evelyn's throat tightened as she traced one groove with her fingertips. Splinters caught her skin. Daniel swallowed audibly. Something tried to get out. Evelyn's gaze dropped to the handle. Rust flaked where metal met wood. Her fingers hovered, trembling despite herself. She forced them forward, gripping, twisting. The knob refused to turn. Lock. From the other side came the faintest sound, not a whisper, not exactly, but a dragging scrape like nails across wood. Evelyn and Daniel froze, their breaths caught. And then, so soft it could have been imagination, a voice. "Let me out." The silence after the voice was unbearable. Evelyn's hand remained frozen on the knob, her pulse hammering in her throat so hard she feared it might give her away. Daniel's flashlight trembled against the scratched wood, the beam jittering as though the house itself were shaking him. The sound didn't come again. No dragging, no whisper, only the faint tick of their own breath. At last, Daniel lowered the light and exhaled, the breath breaking ragged. That wasn't. He stopped himself, voice cracking. That wasn't real. It couldn't have been. Evelyn stepped back from the door, clutching her satchel strap so tightly it cut into her palm. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to rationalize it. The wind, a creak in the beams, the tricks of nerves in a place like this. But she couldn't shake the way the words had slid through the air, almost brushing against her ear. "Let me out." She didn't tell Daniel that she'd recognized the voice as a child's. "Let's keep moving," she said instead, though her throat was dry. "We'll come back to this." "Come back? Are you insane?" But Evelyn was already pushing forward, desperate for distance from the locked door. The hallway bent slightly to the right, and at the far end stood another door, this one slightly ajar. Her flashlight beam caught on something inside, not furniture, not peeling wallpaper, but shapes stacked neatly against the wall. As she stepped closer, the smell hit her first. Mildew, rot, the bitter tang of old paper left to dampen in darkness. She pushed the door open fully. Inside was a small study. A desk sagged against the far wall, its drawers warped. Shelves leaned under the weight of books swollen from moisture. But it was the stack of journals on the floor that caught her eye. Dozens of them, some leather-bound, others cloth, their spines cracked, pages yellowed. Evelyn crouched, hands trembling as she lifted the top one. The cover bore no title, only initials etched faintly, H.W. She opened it. The handwriting inside was neat at first, looping cursive inked in fading blue. April 12, 1954. It began as a diary of a family, Henry Whitlock, his wife Margaret, their 3 children. Notes about the garden, the weather, dinners at the table. The entries felt so ordinary that Evelyn almost relaxed, until she reached further in. The script grew uneven. Words staggered. Blotches marred the margins as though the writer's hand had trembled. Something scratches at the walls at night. Margaret says it's rats. But the sound moves. Room to room. Following us. Evelyn flipped forward. June 2nd. The children wake screaming. They say there are people in the hall, shadows moving though no lantern is lit. I told them it was a dream. But I saw them too. Her hands went cold. June 14th. The windows show things they should not. When I look out, I see not the garden, but a dark plain with no horizon. Margaret begged me not to write this, but I must. If anyone finds this, they must know. The house is not a house. It is a mouth. It is feeding on us. Evelyn's breath hitched, fogging the page. "Evie," Daniel said softly, pulling her back. He crouched beside her, his eyes wide in the dim beam. "That's enough. Put it back." But she couldn't. She flipped to the final pages. The writing had deteriorated into frantic scratches, words almost illegible. Over and over, the same phrase filled entire lines. "It's inside with us." The last page bore only gouged indentations where the pen had ripped through the paper, as though the writer's hand had pressed down until the nib broke. Evelyn dropped the book, heart slamming. It hit the floor with a puff of dust that spiraled into the air like smoke. Daniel swore under his breath. "We need to leave. Now." Evelyn shook her head, forcing herself to steady. "No. This is the story. Don't you see? This isn't just a haunted house myth. There are records, evidence. A family lived here, they vanished," Daniel snapped. "Just like we will if we don't get the hell out." She stared at him, her ambition and fear tearing her in opposite directions. Finally, she closed the satchel over one of the journals, sliding it inside. "We stay. Just a little longer." Daniel cursed again, but he didn't stop her. That night, the house refused to sleep. They set up in the living room, their lantern a small island of light amid the yawning dark. Evelyn recorded footage, her voice low but steady as she described the journals, the warnings, the history of disappearances. Her hands shook only once, when the whispering began again. It came from the walls this time. Faint, layered, like many voices murmuring at once, impossible to separate into words. Daniel aimed the camera toward the sound, but the lens caught only peeling wallpaper. Then came a slam, the front door shutting hard enough to rattle the frame. They both leapt to their feet. Daniel sprinted forward, grabbing the handle, yanking. The wood shuddered but held fast. "It won't open," he hissed, jerking harder. "It was fine earlier. Try the windows," Evelyn shouted. But when they staggered into the kitchen and forced the shutters, the sight that met them froze their blood. The glass no longer looked onto the village square or even the trees. Instead, it opened onto a vast, shifting plain, endless black earth under a starless sky. The horizon bled into nothing. No houses. No road. No light. Daniel stumbled back. "This isn't real. This isn't." Evelyn's voice shook. "It's exactly what the journal said." They tore through the house, window after window, but each one revealed something different, something impossible. A forest of withered trees writhing in a wind they could not feel. A desert beneath a burning orange sun. A void that reflected their own faces but wrong, smiling when they weren't. The house was no longer in Hollowhurst. The house was nowhere at all. By midnight the voices grew bolder. Sometimes they called Evelyn's name. Sometimes they laughed softly, a sound that made her skin crawl. The lantern guttered though no draft touched it. Shadows swayed against the far wall though nothing moved. Daniel sat rigid, camera still rolling, his eyes darting to every corner. "We're going to die in here," he whispered, not even to her but to himself. "Stop." Evelyn gripped his arm, forcing him to meet her gaze. "We're going to get out. We just have to hold on until morning. It has to let us out then." But even as she said it, she felt the lie in her bones. Somewhere upstairs a door creaked. They froze. Daniel swallowed hard. What was that? Evelyn's chest tightened. Slowly she lifted the camera and tilted it toward the ceiling. The sound came again, a long dragging footstep. Someone, something, was moving above them. Daniel's face drained of color. "Nope. Nope, nope, nope." He grabbed his pack, fumbling with the straps. "I don't care what you say. I'm not staying another second." He stopped. The air had shifted. Evelyn realized it a heartbeat later. The whispering had stopped. Every sound in the house had ceased, leaving a silence so thick it seemed to suffocate. And in that silence they both heard it, a low groan of wood directly behind them. They turned at once, the camera catching the far corner of the living room. A shadow was there. Not cast by the lantern, not shaped like either of them. A figure darker than the dark, tall and thin, its head bent at an unnatural angle. It did not move. It did not breathe. Evelyn's throat locked. She couldn't even scream. Daniel raised the camera, his voice breaking. "Do you see that?" But the figure was gone. The lantern flickered. And Daniel was no longer beside her. Panic surged through Evelyn's chest. She spun in place, light darting wildly across the room. "Daniel?" No answer. "Daniel?" Her voice cracked against the walls. She bolted up the stairs two at a time, heart slamming, the camera swinging wildly in her grip. She threw open doors, one after the other, but every room was empty. Empty, except for the last one. Her own reflection glared back at her. It was the study mirror, a cracked oval hanging above the desk. The camera pointed at her, recording. And on its playback screen, she froze. Because Daniel was there. In the footage, she saw him behind her, his mouth open in a silent scream, a shape just outside the frame dragging him into the dark. But when she whirled around, nothing. The room was empty. And Evelyn realized, with a sick lurch of her stomach, that she was alone. Evelyn couldn't move. Her own reflection stared back at her in the cracked mirror, distorted into 5 jagged shards of herself. The camera trembled in her hands, the playback still showing Daniel's disappearance in a loop, dragged backward by something her eyes could not see. She whispered his name once more. Daniel? No answer. The house exhaled. She felt it in her chest, a slow heaving as though the air itself had lungs. The sound seemed to ripple through the walls, the floor, the very boards beneath her boots. Evelyn clutched the satchel to her side and stumbled back into the hallway. Every door she'd flung open now stood closed, neat as teeth in a jaw. The wallpaper looked different, darker, the floral patterns warped into shapes that looked almost like eyes. The lantern sputtered. No, 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 she muttered, smacking it with the heel of her hand until it steadied. But the flame inside had grown weaker, its glow barely reaching beyond a few feet. She descended the staircase, intending to retrace her way back to the front door. But the steps stretched endlessly downward. Each time her boots struck the wood, another flight appeared beneath, the landing falling away into shadow. Her breath grew shallow as she ran, only to realize she hadn't descended at all. She was still at the top. The hallway yawned ahead, waiting. Her chest tightened. She forced herself into the nearest room, slamming the door shut behind her. The lantern's light revealed what should have been a bedroom, except it wasn't. The furniture had shifted grotesquely. A wardrobe leaned inward at a 45-degree angle, its doors swinging like jaws. A bed frame jutted from the wall as though half swallowed, its mattress torn and dangling. The smell hit her then, rot and copper, sharp enough to sting her nose. She gagged, pulling her scarf over her mouth. Her flashlight beam passed over the floor. Her knees buckled. Dozens of them. Children's shoes, men's boots, women's slippers, all piled high in the corner like offerings. Some still had mud clinging to their soles. One held the brittle remnants of a foot bone. Evelyn staggered back while rising. She clutched the door frame, but the wood felt wet beneath her palm, not with water but with something thicker, tacky. She yanked her hand away, and even in the dim light she saw it glisten red. Blood. The house pulsed around her, a low groan vibrating in the walls like the echo of a heartbeat. She fled. The corridors twisted. Where once there had been a hallway with 5 doors, there was now a staircase spiraling upward into black. When she tried to descend, she found herself climbing instead. When she tried a door, it opened into a room she swore she'd already entered. At one point, she stumbled into the dining room again, but this time the table was set with steaming plates of food. Roasted meat, glistening with fat. Bowls of fruit, ripe and gleaming. Bread still warm, its crust cracking. And around the table sat people. The Whitlocks. She recognized them from the journal, Henry, Margaret, their 3 children. But their skin was pale, lips blue, eyes fixed forward. They chewed slowly, mechanically, food spilling from slack mouths, blood dribbling down their chins. Evelyn froze in the doorway. Her lantern shook. Margaret's head turned. Her eyes locked onto Evelyn's, pupils blown wide, black swallowing the iris. Her jaw unhinged, dropping far too low, and when she spoke, it was not her voice at all but the voice Evelyn had heard at the locked door. "Let me out." The lantern flickered and died. She ran blind. Her hands slammed into walls that shouldn't have been there, turned corners that looped back on themselves. Her breaths tore ragged from her throat. In the dark, voices clawed at her ears. Daniel's voice. Her mother's. Friends she hadn't heard from in years. "Evie, help me. Evie, it's cold here. Evie, why did you leave me?" She screamed until her throat tore raw. Then her flashlight snapped back on. She was standing in a room she had never seen before. The walls were lined with shelves, every inch stacked with more journals. Hundreds. Thousands. Each one worn, each one bearing initials carved into the cover. She recognized some of the letters, names from the missing persons reports she had studied. Families gone from the village. travelers who never returned. Each had left behind a record. Each had written until the house consumed them. Her knees buckled beneath the weight of it. The satchel at her side suddenly felt obscene, as if carrying one of the Whitlock journals made her complicit in whatever bargain this place demanded. Her hands shook as she picked up a random volume. The pages within were blank. No ink. No words. Only faint indentations where letters might have been pressed, then swallowed away. A sound scraped above her, footsteps dragging across the ceiling. She backed toward the door, but it slammed shut before she touched it. Dust rained from the rafters. The shelves began to rattle, books thudding onto the floor in a deafening cascade. One journal burst open at her feet. Her own handwriting stared back at her. Her blood went cold. The entries were fresh, written in her familiar looping script. The first page was tonight's date. We came to Hollowhurst. The air feels heavy. Daniel doesn't believe. But I must find the truth. The next entry, Daniel is gone. The house has him. And beneath it, a line she had not yet written. The house will have me too. No, she whispered, slamming the book shut. No, no, no. But when she looked up, she saw the shelves weren't filled with strangers' names at all. They were filled with hers. Every book. Every spine. Her initials. The shelves towered above her, stacked with thousands of volumes of her own unwritten journals, all waiting to record her fate. The lantern sputtered back to life. In its glow, she saw something at the far end of the room. A door. Hope flared sharp in her chest. She bolted forward, clutching the journal to her chest. She seized the handle, yanked it open, and staggered back. The locked upstairs room. She stood before the same scratched door she and Daniel had found. Only this time it wasn't closed. It was open. Inside, Daniel waited. He sat on the floor, hunched against the wall. His clothes were torn, his skin pallid, his arms streaked with scratches. He lifted his head slowly, and Evelyn's chest nearly collapsed with relief. Daniel? She rushed forward, falling to her knees beside him. Oh my God, I thought you were. He raised his eyes. They were black. Empty voids that drank in the lantern light and reflected nothing back. Evie, he whispered, voice soft, familiar. Almost right. Almost. She froze. The air around him rippled faintly, like heat above asphalt. His smile stretched too wide, splitting at the corners. And when he spoke again, it was not Daniel's voice. Stay with me. The door slammed shut behind her. The room pulsed. The air was damp and hot, as though the walls themselves had drawn breath and were holding it in. Evelyn pressed back against the door, her lantern trembling, the weak flame quivering against the shadows. Daniel, or what wore Daniel's face, stood before her. His smile stretched impossibly, tearing small fissures at the corners of his mouth, though no blood spilled. His blackened eyes never blinked. Evie, he crooned again, voice syrup-thick, dragging her name like a chain. You came back. She forced herself to shake her head, though her throat locked tight. You're not him. His head tilted, bones creaking like dry wood. I am what's left. He's here. We're here. The house keeps us. His voice deepened, layered with others, an echo of countless throats. It will keep you too. Her knees trembled so violently she thought she might collapse. The satchel at her side felt suddenly unbearable, the weight of the Whitlock journal a reminder of every name, every voice swallowed before her. She pulled it free and hurled it at the figure. It passed straight through him, hitting the wall with a dull thud. The thing that looked like Daniel laughed softly, the sound slithering into her ears, scraping something raw inside her chest. Words don't matter here. Stories don't matter. Only the house matters. The lantern sputtered. Evelyn lunged for the door, clawing at the knob, but it refused to turn. Splinters bit into her palms as she yanked, shoved, hammered her fist against the wood. Behind her the footsteps shifted. Slow. Measured. Coming closer. She spun and lifted the lantern high. Stay away from me. The thing stepped into the light. The glow revealed its true form now. Daniel's frame hollowed, ribs visible beneath stretched, waxy skin. His mouth opened wider, wider still, until it split from ear to ear. Inside was no tongue, no teeth, only a void black and endless. Stay, it moaned. The voices behind the word layered upon each other, hundreds deep, some screaming, some whispering, some sobbing. Stay. Evelyn's body seized. Every instinct screamed at her to give in, to fall into that void, to let it close over her like warm water. It was so easy, so quiet, so inevitable. But then her hand brushed against the satchel again, and she felt the corner of the camera inside. Cold. Hard. Real. Her breath came ragged. She yanked it free, raised it, and hit record. The red light blinked. The creature froze. Its void mouth twitched. The shadows behind it stirred restlessly. You can't have me, Evelyn whispered, voice breaking but fierce. Not while I'm still telling this story. She turned the camera on herself, her own face pale and shaking in the tiny playback screen. My name is Evelyn Marks, she gasped. If anyone sees this, the Hollow House is alive. It doesn't haunt. It devours. Don't. The lantern guttered out. Darkness swallowed her. When the flame returned, Evelyn was no longer in the upstairs room. She stood in the dining hall again, but the space had changed. The wallpaper peeled away in strips, revealing not plaster but layers of flesh, gray and slick, pulsing faintly with each breath of the house. The long table stretched impossibly far, and on it lay bodies, hundreds, maybe thousands. Some were skeletal, crumbling to dust. Others still twitched faintly, mouths moving in silent screams. Daniel was among them, his eyes black, his lips mouthing words she couldn't hear. The ceiling above stretched and contracted, a cavernous ribcage. The floor was soft beneath her boots, sinking slightly with each step as though she stood on a tongue. The house was no metaphor. It was alive, and she was inside it. She staggered backward, gagging, until her hand brushed the edge of the table. The body's eyes all opened at once. Every one of them stared directly at her. The sound came then, an eruption of voices, thousands speaking at once, pleading, cursing, begging, weeping. The noise drilled into her skull, splintering thought, until she dropped the lantern and clutched her head, screaming. Above her the ceiling split open. Flesh tore like paper. Beyond it was not sky but an even deeper dark, filled with shapes writhing just out of sight. Long, spindled fingers pressed against the tear, clawing through. The house was opening wider. And she was the meal. No, she shrieked, her voice shredded by terror. She lurched for the fallen lantern, seizing it by the handle. With her other hand, she pulled the Whitlock journal from the floor where it had fallen. She stuffed a page into the flame. It caught instantly. The fire bloomed, greedy and bright, spreading across the paper. She hurled it onto the table. The bodies convulsed as the fire licked across them, their screams rising above the roar. Flames devoured the rotted wood, the greasy flesh walls, the curtains of skin. Evelyn staggered back as the inferno grew, the house howling, a sound so deep it rattled her bones. She sprinted for the door. This time it gave, bursting open into the night. She stumbled onto the porch, coughing, choking on ash. Behind her the house blazed. Fire poured from every window, thick black smoke rising into the starless sky. The air boiled with heat. And yet, the structure did not collapse. Its beams did not buckle. Its walls did not fall. The fire clung to it like a veil, burning, but the house remained whole, standing tall and silent amid the inferno. Evelyn staggered into the fog, her lungs heaving. Villagers gathered at the edge of the square, drawn by the flames. Their faces were pale, eyes wide, but none stepped forward. They only watched. She fell to her knees, clutching the camera to her chest. Its red light still blinked, recording everything. She lifted it, aiming the lens at herself. Her face, smeared with soot and blood, stared back. Her eyes were wide, hollow, trembling with what she had seen.